What would you do if the person who betrayed you shared your blood? A seemingly perfect marriage, two bright children, a peaceful home filled with laughter, all of it shattered in one single afternoon when the truth came out. Her husband had been cheating on her with her own sister. From the pain of betrayal to the strength of starting over, this is a story about heartbreak, healing, and the courage to stand up again. Today, let's listen to the story of Emily Carter, a woman who lost everything, only to find herself again. Some betrayals don't come from strangers, they come from people who share your last name. That was the thought that haunted Sarah Mitchell long before she ever knew what it truly meant. Sarah was 30, living in a quiet suburb of Portland, Oregon, where the air always smelled faintly of rain and cedar. She worked as a nurse at the local clinic, known by everyone for her calm voice and warm smile, the kind of woman who remembered birthdays, baked cookies for the neighbors, and always put others before herself. To most people, she was the definition of kindness. Her husband Daniel managed a small construction company. They had been married for 10 years and had 2 children, Oliver, 8, curious and full of questions, and Grace, 5, shy but tender-hearted. Together, they made up a picture-perfect family, the kind that looked like a holiday postcard. Their mornings were simple but precious. Daniel brewed her coffee every sunrise, the scent filling their kitchen as Sarah packed lunchboxes and helped Grace tie her shoes. Oliver would run around pretending to be a superhero, and Daniel would scoop him up, laughing. In those moments, Sarah often thought, this is it, this is happiness. Then there was Megan, her younger sister, 6, beautiful, ambitious, always the center of attention. Megan had recently moved back to Portland after quitting her job in Los Angeles. Sarah welcomed her with open arms, happy to have family close again. Megan came over often, helped with the kids, and joined them for dinners. It felt good, familiar, safe, until the safety started to feel strange. One Saturday afternoon, during a backyard barbecue, Sarah noticed Daniel and Megan sharing a quiet laugh near the grill. At first it was nothing, a casual moment between family, but the way Daniel's eyes lingered a little too long, the way Megan tucked her hair behind her ear with that nervous half-smile, it made something inside Sarah tighten. She blinked the thought away, convincing herself she was being paranoid. Don't be ridiculous, she whispered under her breath, turning back to refill the lemonade. They're just close, that's all. Yet, deep down, a strange unease had begun to take root, faint but real, like a low hum under the noise of laughter. And later, when that laughter faded, she would remember this day, the day the first crack appeared in the life she thought was unbreakable. It started with something small, something that shouldn't have mattered. The following Friday evening, Sarah came home earlier than usual. The sky outside was painted in fading gold, and the scent of rain hung heavy in the air. She parked the car quietly, hoping to surprise the kids. But as she stepped inside, the house was strangely still. The TV was off, dinner wasn't on the stove, and there was a faint sound, laughter coming from upstairs. At first she smiled. Maybe Daniel and the kids are playing hide-and-seek again. She slipped off her shoes, climbed the staircase, and followed the sound. But as she reached the top, she realized there was only one voice, laughing, Daniel's, and another one answering softly, Megan's. Single quotes as her body froze. The laughter came from the guest room, the one Megan had been staying in since she moved back. The door was slightly ajar, just enough for Sarah to see Daniel sitting on the edge of the bed, his hand brushing against Megan's. They weren't touching in any overtly intimate way, but something about the closeness, the quiet way they looked at each other, carried a weight that felt heavier than any embrace. For a heartbeat, Sarah couldn't breathe. The air thickened, pressing against her chest. Megan, Daniel said, his voice low, almost tender. You know, I can't stop thinking about you. The words hit like a hammer. Her vision blurred. She stepped back, the floorboard creaking under her weight. Instantly, the laughter stopped. The door opened, and Megan appeared, startled, her face turning pale. Daniel stood behind her, eyes wide, guilt written all over his expression. Sarah, he stammered. This isn't what it looks like. Then what is it, Daniel? Her voice cracked, a mix of disbelief and fury, because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what it shouldn't be. Silence. Only the sound of rain beginning to patter against the window. Megan opened her mouth, tears forming, but Sarah cut her off. Don't you dare. Her mind raced. Images flashed, dinners together, the laughter at the barbecue, the secret glances she'd dismissed. It all connected now, like shards of glass forming a single, cruel picture. Daniel took a hesitant step forward. It was a mistake, he whispered. It's not what you think. You're right, she said coldly. It's worse than I could ever think. Her hands trembled, but she didn't cry. Not yet. She walked past them, down the stairs, each step heavier than the last. The children's drawings lined the hallway, stick figures of a smiling family. She paused, looking at them through tears she didn't realize had fallen. In the kitchen. She gripped the counter, forcing herself to breathe. Her reflection in the window looked like a stranger, pale, hollow, trembling. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to break the illusion completely, but all she could do was stand there, listening to the sound of her world collapsing in quiet fragments. Minutes passed before Daniel came downstairs. He didn't try to explain again. He just stood at the doorway, guilt soaking every word he couldn't say. Sarah finally spoke, her voice steady but sharp. "You need to leave. Both of you, Sarah, please go." And just like that, the man she once trusted with her whole heart walked out, his footsteps echoing down the porch. Megan followed behind him, silent, ashamed, unable to meet her sister's eyes. The door closed with a soft click, a sound so small, yet final enough to mark the end of everything she had believed in that night. Sarah sat alone at the kitchen table, the coffee untouched, the rain whispering against the window. The house felt colder, emptier. She had thought betrayal would come with shouting, chaos, maybe even violence, but instead, it came quietly, like a slow bleed, invisible until it was too late. And as the thunder rolled across the darkened sky, Sarah realized something terrifying. The people you love the most are often the ones holding the knife. The rain that night never stopped. It fell in long steady lines against the windows, as if the sky itself couldn't hold back its grief. Sarah barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw them: Daniel's guilty stare, Megan's trembling hands. It replayed over and over, until exhaustion dulled the pain into something numb and hollowed up. By morning, the numbness turned into resolve. She needed answers. When Daniel came home the next day, the house was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator. He stepped inside cautiously, as if entering someone else's home. Sarah was sitting at the dining table, her hands clasped around a cup of cold coffee, eyes red but steady. "Sarah," he began quietly, "can we talk?" She didn't look up. "You should have thought about that before, Daniel," he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It wasn't supposed to happen. You have to believe me. It just got out of control. Got out of control." She finally met his eyes, sharp tag. "You don't accidentally fall into your wife's sister's arms. You make a choice." Daniel's shoulders dropped. For the first time, he stopped pretending. "I know I screwed up," he said. "I was lonely, Sarah. You were always busy with the kids, with work. Megan was just there." She listened. A bitter laugh escaped her. "So it's my fault, then, because I was taking care of our children while you went looking for excitement in my own family." He flinched but didn't answer. The silence between them was thick, suffocating. Then came the soft knock on the door. It was her mother. "Sweetheart, please," her mother pleaded the moment she stepped inside. "Let's not make this bigger than it already is." Sarah stared in disbelief. "Bigger than it is? Mum, he slept with Megan." Her mother hesitated, then lowered her voice. "He made a mistake. You've been distant. He's a good man. Sarah, don't throw away your marriage over a moment of weakness." Sarah froze, unable to process the words. "A moment of weakness," she repeated, almost whispering. "He destroyed our family. She destroyed our family. And you're telling me to fix it?" "Family is meant to be forgiven," her mother said firmly. "You can't just run away every time something breaks." Sarah felt something inside her snap. A quiet, final break. "That's exactly what I'm going to do." Her father arrived later that evening, eyes heavy with disappointment, not toward her but toward everyone else. He didn't say much, just placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You don't owe anyone your pain," he said simply. "You do what you need to protect those kids." That night, Sarah packed. She folded clothes in silence, every motion mechanical, every zipper a goodbye. Oliver and Grace watched from the doorway, confusion clouding their faces. "Mummy, are we leaving?" Oliver asked softly. She knelt down, brushing a tear from his cheek. "Just for a little while, sweetheart. Somewhere peaceful, okay?" He nodded, but his lower lip quivered. "Is Daddy coming?" Sarah swallowed hard. "No, baby, not tonight." By the time the car was loaded, the sky had cleared. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the streetlights. Daniel stood on the porch, hands shoved into his pockets, looking smaller than she'd ever seen him. "Sarah," he said, voice breaking, "please don't take them from me." She paused at the car door, the reflection of the house flickering in her teary eyes. "You already did that yourself." She got in, started the engine, and drove away, not fast, not reckless, just steady. as if each mile were another thread snapping free. Behind her, the house faded into the dark, the home that once held laughter and love. Now nothing more than walls echoing with memories she couldn't bear to keep. When she reached her father's cabin on the edge of town, Sarah carried the sleeping children inside. She tucked them into bed, kissed their foreheads, and stood by the window, looking out into the still night. The reflection staring back at her was no longer the woman who believed in perfect families or unconditional loyalty. She was something else now, fragile but unbroken, shattered yet standing. Her gaze fell on the photo she still held, their wedding picture. Edges frayed, colors fading. She pressed her thumb against it, whispering to the quiet room, "Love isn't supposed to feel like surviving a war." And with that, she placed the picture face down, turned off the light, and closed the door behind her, leaving the ghosts of her old life in the dark where they belonged. The days that followed felt like walking through fog, soundless, colorless, endless. At her father's cabin, the mornings were quiet, broken only by the soft rustle of the trees outside and the faint clinking of dishes in the kitchen. The silence should have been peaceful, but to Sarah, it felt heavy, suffocating, like the calm that follows a storm only because everything in its path has already been destroyed. Her children felt it too, that Oliver had stopped asking about his father. He threw himself into video games, his laughter forced and fleeting. Sometimes, she'd find him staring at the door, as if waiting for someone to walk through it. Grace, on the other hand, retreated inward, her bright chatter replaced by long silences and the quiet sound of crayons against paper. One afternoon, Sarah found a drawing on the kitchen counter. It was a family picture, the kind Grace always made, but this time, there were only 3 people. No father, no aunt, just Sarah, Oliver, and Grace standing under a crooked yellow sun. Her throat tightened. She turned away before the tears could fall. Her father tried to be strong for her, but even he carried the weight in his eyes. "You did the right thing," he said one evening as they sat on the porch, the light fading behind the pines. "I don't feel right," she whispered. "I feel broken. I look at them and all I can think is, I failed." Her father sighed, his gaze steady. "No, Sarah, you didn't fail. You just refused to stay where love no longer lived." His words comforted her, but only for a moment, because outside that cabin, the world had begun to whisper. News of what happened spread through their small town like wildfire. People had a way of twisting the story, making it easier to digest, more entertaining to tell. Some said Sarah had driven her husband away, that she was cold, distant, too focused on work. Others hinted that Megan wasn't the only one at fault, that maybe Daniel and Sarah's marriage had been dying long before at the grocery store. She could feel the looks, those half-sympathetic, half-curious glances that lingered too long. One woman she'd known for years reached out and said, "I'm so sorry, honey, but, you know, men don't stray unless something's missing at home." Sarah smiled faintly, not trusting herself to speak. She just nodded, left her cart half full, and walked out into the parking lot. She sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel. The world outside blurred. For a long time she didn't move. Her chest ached as if her heart was trying to claw its way out. The tears came slow at first, then harder, until she was sobbing, her forehead pressed against the cold glass of the window. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurts anymore, it was the loneliness that followed. The way people's kindness turned into pity, the way their voices softened when they spoke to her, as if she were fragile, the way even her mother hadn't called since that day, refusing to acknowledge what had happened. The worst part wasn't being hated, it was being invisible. Weeks passed. Sarah started teaching again at the local clinic, part-time shifts that helped her stay busy, that helped her feel useful. But every time she passed someone she used to know, the small talk carried hidden landmines. "How are the kids? Have you talked to Daniel?" Every question reminded her of what she had lost. Not just a husband, but the version of herself that believed life was fair. One night, after putting the kids to bed, she stood in the hallway outside their room. Oliver's nightlight flickered softly. Grace slept clutching her stuffed rabbit, her tiny hand resting on a folded piece of paper. Sarah picked it up, another drawing. This one showed a house under a bright sky, and beside it, a woman with wings. Above her head, in Grace's messy handwriting, it said, "Mummy can fly now." Her breath caught. The tears came again, but gentler this time. Later, sitting alone on the porch, she looked up at the stars scattered across the black sky. The night was still, the kind of stillness that both heals and hurts. For the first time in weeks, Sarah let herself exhale a long, shaky breath that carried both grief and release. She wasn't healed, not yet, but somewhere deep down, beneath the pain and the whispers and the guilt, a small spark had survived. And even though the world had turned its back, that spark, fragile, stubborn, refused to go out. Winter melted slowly into spring, and with it, something in Sarah began to thaw too. The fog that had once swallowed her days started to lift. Little by little, pain was still there, quiet, steady, but no longer the kind that crushed her. It had softened into something she could carry. It began with her father. Every morning, he would rise early, making 2 cups of coffee instead of 1, leaving one waiting for her on the kitchen table. Some mornings they didn't talk at all, just sat by the window, watching sunlight spill across the wet grass. And somehow, in those quiet moments, Sarah felt a kind of peace she hadn't known in months. One afternoon, as she folded laundry, her father appeared at the door, holding an old wooden toolbox. "The fence out back's falling apart," he said with a faint smile. "Figured we could fix it together." She hesitated, then followed him outside. The air smelled of pine and damp soil. They worked in silence, at first passing nails, holding boards steady. Her hands were clumsy, the hammer heavy, but every swing felt grounding. Real. When they finished, the fence stood uneven but whole again. Her father looked at her with quiet pride. "Doesn't have to be perfect," he said. "Just strong enough to stand." At night, Sarah slept through until morning for the first time in months. Days became lighter. She started baking again, banana bread, blueberry muffins, things she hadn't touched since the divorce. The kids loved it. Grace would perch on the counter, hands dusted with flour, while Oliver played music on his phone, laughing for real this time. It wasn't much, but it was life returning in tiny, tender pieces. At the clinic, her co-workers welcomed her back gently. One of them, Anana, a new nurse, became a quiet presence in her life. Anna never asked for details, never offered cliches. She simply showed up, brought her coffee, shared quiet lunches. One evening, as they walked to their cars, Anna said softly, "You remind me of someone who's learning how to breathe again." Sarah smiled, a real, unforced smile. "Maybe I am." She began taking walks in the evenings after dinner. The kids joined sometimes, chasing fireflies when the sun dipped low. The world around her didn't feel hostile anymore. It felt forgiving, as if life was slowly letting her back in. Then, one Sunday morning, Sarah found another drawing on the fridge. It was from Grace, of course, done in crayon, all bright colors and crooked lines. This one showed their small cabin under a sky full of stars. There were 3 people again: Sarah, Grace, and Oliver, standing hand in hand. And in the corner, a man with gray hair, holding a mug of coffee. Her father. Beneath it, Grace had written in uneven letters, "We're okay now." Sarah traced the words with her fingertip. Something inside her chest loosened, a knot she hadn't realized she'd been holding onto. Later that evening, she and her father sat on the porch as the sun disappeared behind the trees. The air was warm, the smell of spring everywhere. "You know," he said quietly, "I think the kids are healing because you are." Sarah looked out at the fading light, watching Oliver chase his sister across the yard. "Maybe we all are," she said. Her father chuckled softly. "You're tougher than you think, kiddo." She smiled, resting her head against the back of the chair. For the first time, the world didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt like a beginning. And though she still carried the weight of what had happened, it no longer defined her. It had shaped her, yes, but it had also carved out space for something new. Peace, strength, maybe even hope. That night, as she tucked the kids into bed, Grace whispered, "Mummy, can we stay here forever?" Sarah brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face and smiled. "As long as we need to, sweetheart." She turned off the light, stood by the door for a moment, and whispered into the dark, "We're okay now." For the first time, she truly believed it. Part 6, The Return of the PSD. The calm didn't last forever. It never does. Spring had settled over Portland like a soft blanket. The days were longer, the air warmer, and laughter had returned to the little cabin that once echoed with silence. Sarah thought the worst was behind her. But sometimes, the past has a way of finding its way back. Eventually, when you start to heal. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. Sarah had just come home from the clinic. The kids were doing homework at the kitchen table, sunlight spilling across the floor, when she heard a knock at the door. A slow, hesitant knock, the kind that carried guilt. Her pulse quickened. She already knew who it was. When she opened the door, Daniel stood there, holding a bouquet of wilted flowers, the same kind she used to love. He looked thinner, older. The confidence that once radiated from him was gone, replaced by something desperate and hollow. "Hi, Sarah," he said softly. For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of birds outside filled the silence. Finally, Sarah stepped aside, her voice evened. "The kids are inside. Keep your voice down." He entered cautiously, his eyes sweeping across the familiar space that no longer belonged to him. The smell of coffee and baked bread lingered, a home rebuilt without him. Everything looks different, he murmured. It is, she replied simply. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table. Daniel fidgeted with his hands. I wanted to see the kids. I've been calling, but you never answered. I know, she said. I wasn't ready, he nodded, his voice trembling. I made a mistake, Sarah, the biggest one of my life. Megan and it didn't work. She left a few months ago, said she couldn't handle the guilt, and your mom, she's not talking to me either. I've lost everything. Sarah looked at him, expression calm, almost detached. You didn't lose everything, Daniel. You gave it away. He swallowed hard. I thought I wanted freedom, excitement, but none of it meant anything without you, without the kids. I just want another chance. Her gaze didn't waver. A chance to do what? Break me again. He leaned forward, his voice pleading. I'm not the same man. She let out a quiet laugh, not cruel, but sad. Neither am I. There was no anger in her tone, no shouting, just the quiet authority of someone who had already lived through the worst and survived it. Before she could say more, a small voice interrupted. Dad Oliver stood in the doorway, clutching his backpack. His face was a mix of confusion and resentment. Daniel's eyes softened, tears forming. Hey buddy, I've missed you. But Oliver didn't move. Mum said people who love you don't lie to you. His voice cracked, and before Daniel could respond, he turned and walked away. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Daniel buried his face in his hands. I deserve that. Sarah's tone softened slightly. You do. But you can still be their father, Daniel. If you want that, it has to be on their terms. No manipulation, no excuses. He looked up, eyes filled with regret. I don't even know how to start. Start by showing up, she said. Not for me. For them, he nodded, then rose slowly, glancing one last time at her. You really don't hate me. She met his eyes, steady and kind but firm. I did, for a long time, but hate keeps you tied to the fire, and I've finally stepped out of it. He stood there for a moment, as if waiting for her to say more, but she didn't. Then he walked to the door, his shoulders hunched, and disappeared into the fading light. That night, after the kids were asleep, Sarah sat by the window with a cup of tea. The sky outside was streaked with stars, the kind that looked close enough to touch. She felt something shift inside, a release she hadn't known she was waiting for. Her phone buzzed. A message from her mother. I was wrong, Sarah. I see that now. I'm sorry. Can we talk? Sarah stared at the screen for a long moment, then she typed back. Not yet, but someday. She set the phone aside and looked out into the night. The past had returned, tried to pull her back, but it no longer had the power to break her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a survivor. She felt free. When spring finally turned into summer, the air around the cabin grew warmer, softer, as if the world itself was exhaling after holding its breath too long. Life had returned to its quiet rhythm. On a Saturday evening, Sarah set the dinner table on the porch. The golden light of sunset spilled through the trees, painting everything in shades of amber. The kids laughed somewhere in the yard, chasing bubbles that glimmered like tiny rainbows. Her father was tending the small grill he'd built with Oliver, humming a tune from decades ago. It was nothing extraordinary. Burgers, laughter, the smell of smoke and summer, yet it was everything she had once thought she'd lost. Mum, look. Grace's voice broke through the soft hum of cicadas. She held up a jar full of fireflies, her eyes wide with wonder. They're glowing. Sarah smiled, kneeling beside her daughter. They glow because they're free, sweetheart. The little girl nodded, mesmerized by the flickering light. Sarah's words lingered in her own mind longer than she expected. After dinner, as dusk settled, they sat together on the porch, the three of them wrapped in a blanket, the fireflies blinking in the dark. Oliver leaned against her shoulder and whispered, Mum, do you think Dad will ever come back? She looked at the horizon where the last of the light faded. Maybe, she said softly, but we'll be okay either way. He nodded, satisfied with her answer, and soon drifted off to sleep beside his sister. Her father turned to her then, his eyes reflecting the firelight. You did it, Sarah, he said. You found peace. She smiled faintly. I didn't find it, Dad. I built it. He chuckled quietly, a sound that carried pride and relief all at once. The night deepened, wrapping the cabin in a calm silence. The world outside had gone dark, but Sarah no longer feared the dark. She had learned that some nights aren't meant to be fought, they're meant to be lived through, until the morning finds you again. She thought back to everything that had happened, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the tears shed in silence. It all felt like another life now, a story belonging to someone she used to be. Sometimes pain doesn't leave scars to remind you of what you lost. It leaves space for strength, for forgiveness, for love that finally begins with yourself. Sarah glanced down at her sleeping children, their faces soft and untroubled, and whispered, almost to herself, "We're home." For the first time, she truly meant it. The stars above shimmered, and the night hummed with quiet peace. No dramatic endings, no grand gestures, just a woman, her children, and the simple truth that she had survived what was meant to break her. She had turned her pain into a life worth living again, she realized. Was the real victory. Sometimes the people who break you are the same ones who teach you what strength really means. Sometimes the ending you fear is the beginning you've been waiting for. If you've ever lost something, or someone, and thought you'd never heal, maybe Sarah's story will remind you that you will. You'll laugh again, you'll love again, and one day, you'll wake up and realize you made it through. Thank you for listening to the story of Sarah Mitchell, a woman who lost everything, yet found herself again. If her story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment below. Tell me, have you ever been broken, only to find something more beautiful on the other side?